As I've experimented with new techniques like gel press and oxide sprays, I have built up an impressive assortment of leftover backgrounds. Today's 9 card ideas will work with your backgrounds or pattern paper. And I'm sharing an exciting new tool I just got that I think is going to change how I ink blend, so stay tuned for that. Let's get started. This first background is one I made with Distress Oxide sprays one day when I was trying to be Tiffany. I'm still working on that. When I look at it, I see a pink flower with green leaves under it, and I thought it would be fun to work with the features of the background. So I took a look through my stamps and I found this Hero Arts tulip stamp that seemed to fit pretty well. And I stamped it along with one of the sentiments from the set with some Eclipse black ink. Because of the chalky finish on the paper, I had to stamp it a few times to get a deep, crisp impression. And this looks pretty just as it is, but I grabbed a few Copic markers to add a bit of shading. Each of the colors is matched pretty closely to the colors on the panel, so I won't have to color the flowers fully, just enhance the colors that are already there. This gives the tulips a bit of a dimensional look. The stamp was placed off-center to take advantage of the colors on the panel, so when the coloring was done, I grabbed a couple of rectangle dies to see which one would fit best, and then I trimmed the panel with one of them. And there was just enough left on that one side of the panel for me to use a larger rectangle die to just cut a frame from the panel. And this will help give the look of an even larger panel, but with some added interest from the white frame area between the focal panel and the frame. And that's it. I just added a few red illusion gems from Crafty Meraki for a little bit of sparkle, and I left it very simple. This next background was an experiment of watercolor powder on gel plates. That is such a cool, quick technique that it's really easy to make a ton of backgrounds really quickly, and I've still got quite a few left. I grabbed this newish Gina K cover plate that I bought before Christmas and didn't get around to using it, and I cut it from the blue panel. But wouldn't it be a shame to lose those pretty blue bits that are left over? So I grabbed a white panel of cardstock and I taped the blue panel to it with mint tape. I don't want it stuck down, just held in position. Then I inlaid all those little pieces back into their places with liquid glue. This was a bit fiddly, and it got even more fiddly in a minute when I was trying to lift up the large blue panel while leaving all the little pieces behind. But I got there finally, and I think it was worth it. I cut the blue circle out from the white panel with an Essential Circles die, which will give me a negative frame. Doing this also really pressed those blue pieces onto the white circle. I also did the same thing as my first card, and I managed to get a rectangle frame from the leftovers, and that will give my white card a lovely blue edge that matches perfectly. And there's no rule that says you have to use your panels the way they ended up in the box. I added some gold and white metallic splatter to the blue panel before finishing the blue card. I left these both pretty simple, and I just added some periwinkle gems to the blue card and some fairy garden gems to the white one. This next little panel is a small piece I rescued from a roll-off sheet from a session with my gel plate and my Dilutions metallic paints. I've got another newish Simon Says stamp item here, the spun glass embossing folder. And I'll admit part of the reason I haven't used it yet is because it's so thick, I had no idea what the sandwich would be. So the first time I ran it through, my sandwich wasn't thick enough, and I only got some partial embossing. The geometric pattern is there, but not the detailed lines on each of the curvy diamond shapes. That's not the look I want today, but it's a good thing to know for another time. It may be an easy way to get more from an embossing folder. But when you're guessing, it's always good to start with a sandwich that's too thin and that adds shims. In the end, I used 4 of the green Gemini double-sided plates. I don't know if you know about them, but they're great for adding to your regular sandwich to reduce warping of your clear cutting plate. And I have a few of them on hand. And now you can see that all the detail is there, and this pretty background is even prettier. When I'm working with a panel like this, I like to keep the finish pretty simple. Just a die-cut sentiment with its shadow to help it stand out. Since the panel was pretty small, I also added a black frame cut with a rectangle die, which adds a bit of definition. Next, I've got 2 more of those Distress Oxide spray backgrounds. This one's the prettier one. I love the pink and blue in the center. It's about 6 by 9 inches, so I should be able to get 2 cards from this. But before that, I'm going to highlight some of the colors with partial stenciling. I start with the square doily from a Colorful Life Designs and some pucker up ink, and I just add little bits of stenciling in random places. I change my ink to cummerbund to pick up on that blue, and you can see how this technique is just adding some really fun texture. I grabbed the simple Mosaic stencil, which is more geometric, and I used some serenading to contrast with the swirls from the doily. I added some white splatter to break up these rich colors a bit, And then I grabbed an old palette of metallic watercolors. It's so old, it took me quite a while and quite a lot of water to get them working, but they did work in the end. Then I remembered one of my old favorites, clear shimmer spray, so I added some of that too. Once it was dry, I laid down my rectangle on the area I thought was prettier for my full panel and a large word die on the other side. You could cut letters from an alphabet die set. These are great ways to use up panel scraps that are too pretty to throw out but hard to store and keep track of. Now I've also got a roll-off sheet here. These are often pretty because of the shimmery paint I use. But roll-off sheets can be tricky because when you look at the whole sheet, you see the messy edges and you might be tempted to think it isn't worth saving. But here's the thing. If you just cut it down with the largest rectangle or square or circle you've got, and then you clean up those edges, all of a sudden you'll see you've got something that is beautiful and very usable. I think this combination would be too dark for me. So another thing you can do with the panel is to use it to cut the shadow to a word die. To finish this one, you guessed it, I cut another frame from that Oxide spray panel and I used it to add some definition to my white card. I finished this one with some blue illusion gems. Going back to the idea that you don't have to use the panel the way it is, I'm going to add some ink blending to the edges of this one to give some definition. To help, I recently bought this rotating platform from We Are Memory Keepers. It has a self-healing cutting mat on top of a turntable. The cutting mat is double-sided and it fits perfectly in the turntable and it has a fairly smooth surface. When I ink blend, I like to turn my panel and come in with the ink from the same side all the time. So I'm hoping that a turntable will make that a faster process for me. I think it could help with Copic coloring and alcohol ink panels too, which are both techniques where I like to turn my paper. I do have another turntable in my craft room that my Gemini Junior sits on, and I love it. And I got that one from Amazon, but its surface isn't smooth, so it wouldn't work for ink blending. For cleaning, I simply spritz with water and wipe the ink off. It's really just like any other self-healing cutting mat that you already have. To finish this one, I added my favorite Happy Birthday Sentiment die cut from Penny Black and a single flower from Crafty Meraki. I finished with Rose Garden Gems. This panel is that last panel's less pretty cousin, another Oxide spray panel, but a less interesting mix of colors. And I recently got this floral lace die from Pickfresh Studios. I have to say I've been doing well at using my 2023 purchases as they come in, but I still have a backlog of 2022 goodies to use. I've cut this already from a white panel, and I could just glue it over top, but you know I love die cut inlay. But there's no way I'm putting all those tiny little petals back in, so faux inlay is the way to go here. To do this, I used the die to emboss the panel without cutting all the way through. The panel's now bumpy and a little distressed, which is a neat surprise, and all I have to do is add some liquid glue to the backs of all those little flowers. And then I place the white die cut over top of the bumpy panel. It almost kind of clicks into place. And now because of those raised petals, it looks like I inlaid them all. Next, I took it one little step further and I ran the panel through my die cutting machine, just in between the plates, no dies. This really pushed the two pieces together and now they are super flat. Just depends which look you like better. To finish this one, I trimmed the panel with a rectangle die. Didn't get it quite centered, but that's okay. It adds some visual interest to have the right edge be a little different from the left. I added a white Avery L. Thanks die cut, along with a pearlescent vellum shadow, and then I added lots of Mystic Topaz gems, which are a perfect match for these colors. This is another one of my watercolor powder backgrounds that I made with the gel press. It's a perfect background for a masculine card, I think, but I also think it could really do with a pop of bold color. I grabbed my gel press and a couple of paints. One's called Ruby and the other is Cherry Pie, which is a bright red pink with shimmer. When I'm gel printing or ink blending or even coloring, I love to add two shades of the same color to add some subtle visual interest. I've used a fresh white panel and a heart die to create a mask, and I could put the mask down first and just blend paint through the hole, but by covering the whole gel plate, I can get enough for 2 cards. I got the paint down, put the mask down, and then I put my gray panel on top, pressing firmly and evenly. The opaque paint layers up over the background and gives me a nice, rich, crisp impression. I kept this one very simple. I added some black splatter and I backed the panel onto a black card base. I added 3 gems in decreasing sizes along the bottom right side of the heart. And I've still got this other panel with the heart cutout. I love that you can see the pink and the red working together. You can see some brayer marks, even some old paint it picked up. This all gave me a rustic feel, so I used a craft card base, filled in the hole with a white die cut heart, And I added that big Love You die cut from Waffle Flower that I had added macchiato ink to. I finished this one with gold illusion gems. And don't worry about those extra little pieces from the backgrounds I cut down. I used them to cut some strips and word dyes and shadows for future projects. Do you have backgrounds or pattern paper to use up? Which one of these ideas will you try first? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.